Malik Thompson was 42 years old, and he believed that a man who gives everything to his family will always have a family to come home to. He was wrong. For 18 years, he poured every dollar, every double shift, every quiet sacrifice into a life he thought they were building together. Then one Tuesday night in late October, he opened a hidden safe. Behind the wardrobe in his wife's home office in Buckhead, Atlanta, and found $420,000 in cash, investment contracts under another woman's name, a USB drive of messages never meant for his eyes, and a divorce plan his wife had written 3 years ago. 3 years. While he worked double shifts downtown, while he turned down a promotion to be home for their children, while he sat beside her in the third pew of First African Methodist Episcopal Church on Peachtree Road every single Sunday. But here is what Keisha Thompson did not know. Malik had already signed the divorce papers, and he had placed them inside her safe. He locked the dial, stepped back into the dark hallway, and whispered, "You really thought I was stupid enough to never find out?" Psychologists call this pathological accommodation, when a good person suppresses their own pain to preserve peace in a relationship. Malik didn't lack awareness. He lacked the belief that his suffering was worth disrupting the family over. This is one of the most quietly damaging patterns in long-term marriages. The moment he stopped accommodating and started documenting was the moment his recovery actually began, long before any papers were signed. Atlanta in late October makes the world look more stable than it is. The air turns cool, the magnolias along Peachtree Road go still, and the afternoons carry that golden light that flatters houses and marriages that have been hollowing out for years. Malik drove home from the job site just after 7, hard hat clipped to his belt, boots dusted with red Georgia clay. The radio played Luther Vandross. He turned it down without thinking about why. Their brick house sat on a quiet block in Buckhead, a deep front porch, a persimmon tree Malik had planted the year Josiah was born. He had dug that hole himself on a Saturday afternoon while Keisha sat on the steps, laughing at his precision. "Baby, it's a tree, not a skyscraper." "Everything I build," he said, pressing the soil flat, "I build to last." The porch light was on when he pulled in. The television flickered blue through the window. Normal. Quiet. Everything as it should appear. Except Malik had stopped trusting appearances 6 months ago. It started with a phone call he wasn't supposed to hear. Home early from a site inspection, he found Keisha in the kitchen, door half closed, voice dropped low. "The money is still safe. He still believes I'm the devoted wife." Malik stood in the hallway for 3 full seconds. Then he set his keys down, gently, without a sound, and walked upstairs. He said nothing that evening, nothing the next morning. He simply began paying attention differently. He installed hidden cameras. He reviewed footage late at night. He watched her transfer $52,000 from their joint account just 4 days after he'd been taken to Grady Memorial Hospital following a worksite fall. He had called her 4 times from the emergency room. She never answered. Then he found the safe, and inside it, everything. He didn't explode. He didn't confront her. He reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope he'd been carrying for 11 days, and placed it quietly in the back corner of the safe. Signed divorce papers, Victor Lang's name on the return address. He locked the dial, walked out, and for the first time in 18 years, slept soundly. This is what psychologists call emotional regulation under threat, suppressing the impulse to confront in favor of building the leverage needed to act on one's own terms. It is the behavior of a man who has finally, fully decided to protect himself. That decision is often the hardest step, not because it requires dramatic courage, but because it requires complete acceptance of a truth the person has been quietly resisting for years. But what Malik didn't yet know What no one in that house knew was that Keisha still had one move left, and it was the most dangerous one of all. If you discovered your spouse had been secretly planning to leave you for 3 years, would you confront them on the spot or go completely silent and prepare like Malik did? Drop confront or silent in the comments and tell us why. To everyone at First African Methodist Episcopal Church on Peachtree Road, the Thompsons were the couple other couples quietly measured themselves against. Keisha brought the sweet potato casserole to the church bazaar every November, 3 years running, undefeated. Malik hauled the folding tables without complaint. Deacon Harris used to say they were proof that real commitment was still alive in Buckhead. If only he had known what was happening behind their front door. Malik had met Keisha 20 years earlier at Clark Atlanta University, a study group in the Robert W. Woodruff Library that neither had planned to attend. She was a marketing major with quick eyes and a laugh that turned heads. He was working toward his construction management degree, serious by nature. She borrowed his highlighter and never gave it back, and he spent 2 weeks finding excuses to sit near her until she finally said, "You can just ask me to dinner, you know." So he did. Their wedding was in Savannah, on the beach near Forsyth Park, white gardenias and her mother crying in the front row. Keisha took both of his hands at the altar and said, "We'll get through everything together. Everything." He believed her completely. When Nia was born, Malik stood in the delivery room at Piedmont Atlanta Hospital and felt something settle inside him that he had no words for, like a foundation being poured. When Josiah came 3 years later, the family felt complete. His firm offered him a senior project manager role, more pay, more travel. He turned it down. Keisha had just returned to her marketing job on 14th Street in Midtown, and the children needed consistency. He became the one who cooked dinner on school nights, drove Josiah to chess club in Decatur on Saturday mornings, helped Nia with history projects at the kitchen table. His wife never asked him to make those sacrifices. He made them freely, because that was who he was, a man who built things to last. Mental health professionals call this self-erasure in service of attachment, one partner setting aside their ambitions and needs to preserve the relationship. In healthy marriages, this sacrifice is mutual. But when one partner is manipulative, that generosity is never reciprocated. It is absorbed, normalized, and eventually expected. Over time, this self-erasing partner loses not just opportunities, but their sense of what they deserve. And that erosion of self-worth is precisely what the manipulative partner relies on. The changes in Keisha came gradually. She spent more evenings at the office. Her phone acquired a new password. At the dinner table, she alternated between long silences and chatter so relentless it felt rehearsed. Malik filed these things away and told himself he was tired. Tired men imagine things. Then came the phone call, and he understood he had not been imagining anything at all. 4 months after that call, Nia came home on a Thursday night, 17, 3 months pregnant, shaking. The young man she had been seeing had put his hands on her the previous weekend. She had carried that alone for 4 days. She sat at the kitchen table and told her mother first, because she had always told her mother first. She needed $7,000 for a family attorney and a protective order. Keisha listened, nodded with the right expressions, then said, "Baby, we just don't have that right now. It would break your father's heart." Malik was in the hallway. He heard every word. He took one step toward the kitchen, ready to say, "I have it, tell me what you need." But before he could speak, Keisha looked up and saw him. Her eyes calculated him in 1 second flat. Then she pressed a hand to her chest and let her breath stagger. "I just feel so helpless," she whispered, tears arriving perfectly. "My heart just—" Nia immediately turned her worry toward her mother. "Mama, sit down." And Malik stood in the hallway, silent. Because what kind of man pushes forward in that moment? That, he would think later, was the genius of it. Not ordinary cruelty, something colder. Design. Psychologists call this tactical vulnerability display, performing emotional or physical fragility to neutralize a perceived threat. When Malik moved to help Naya, Keisha's apparent distress simultaneously silenced him, redirected Naya's concern away from her own crisis, and reinforced the narrative that Keisha was the one who needed protecting. This tactic is devastating precisely because it exploits the genuine empathy of people who love the person performing it. The love itself becomes the mechanism of control. 3 weeks later, Malik fell 12 feet from scaffolding on a job site on Northside Drive. 2 fractured ribs, a cracked wrist. He called Keisha 4 times from the Grady Memorial waiting room. She didn't answer. She texted at 9:30. Sorry, was in a meeting. Soup on the stove. He lay in the dark hospital room, listening to the monitors, and felt something go very still and cold inside his chest. Not rage, not grief. Clarity. She does not love you. She never planned to stay. He went home the next morning and pulled up the camera footage. At 10:45 p.m., 45 minutes after her text, his wife had transferred $52,000 into an account he had never seen. Malik Thompson, the man who planted trees to last, he finally understood what he had been living inside. Psychologists call this perceptual rupture, when accumulated evidence breaks through a person's protective self-deception and reality lands without cushion. It is rarely dramatic. It is usually quiet, cold, and irreversible. What distinguishes resilient individuals is what they do in the hours after. Rather than collapsing or exploding, Malik channeled his clarity into action. He called Victor Lang the following Sunday. He had already begun building his way out. He had 6 months of evidence. He had Victor Lang. And he had 1 envelope placed quietly in a safe that his wife believed only she could open. What Malik found the second time he opened that safe wasn't just hidden money. It was a document that revealed exactly how precisely his wife had been studying him for years. The second time Malik stood in front of that safe, it was a Sunday morning. His wife had left for a baby shower in Marietta, burgundy dress, gardenias, the brightness she reserved for occasions where she needed to be seen. She kissed him at the door with that practiced lightness and said she'd be home by 4. Malik waited until her car turned off the block. Then he moved the wardrobe, stood in front of the safe, and entered the combination he'd worked out 2 weeks earlier. Keisha always used dates. Her mother's birthday for her email, their anniversary for the house alarm, and for the things she needed most protected, she used Amina's birthday, March 4th, 304. The lock opened with a clean click. The cash was there, the pale blue folder with the investment contracts under Amina's name, the USB drive labeled in white tape, K. And then there was the document, 27 pages, plain copy paper, paper-clipped at the upper left. The cover read, in Keisha's precise hand, Transition Strategy, Year 3. He read it standing up in the pale morning light. It had been drafted 3 years ago, the same year Malik earned his senior project manager title. The year the firm gave him a raise and a company truck. The year he had genuinely believed things were turning a corner. The financial plan was methodical. Gradually shift shared assets into accounts under Amina's name, amounts small enough, spread far enough apart, that no single transfer would raise concern. If Malik ever questioned a balance, the prepared response was already written in. I had to cover the children's expenses. The image strategy. Maintain perfect church attendance, stay visible at community events, project the devoted wife, consistently enough that the social record would speak for itself in court. The Weagle timeline. File when Josiah turned 16. Assets gone. Nia a legal adult. Custody following Josiah's stated preference. The exit narrative was the part that landed hardest. How to frame Malik's long work hours as emotional neglect. The same hours he had worked to pay the bills she was draining. Malik set the document down. He looked at the envelope in the corner of the safe. Signed divorce papers, Victor Lang's name on the return address, and felt something move through his chest. Not rage, not grief. Relief. The clean, steady relief of a man who no longer has to wonder. What Malik was reading is what psychologists call a scripted exit strategy, a long-term plan designed to maximize one partner's legal and financial position while eliminating the other's ability to respond. Beyond the financial harm, researchers describe the discovery as retrospective grief. Grief not only for the marriage ending, but for all the years spent investing in something that had already ended for the other person. Every shared Sunday, every ordinary morning, reframed. That rewriting is often the deepest wound. He was still standing there when the front door opened. His wife was back early. She came down the hallway. "Malik? Baby, you here?" And he stepped out of the office, closed the door, and met her in the hallway. She saw his face and stopped. "What's wrong?" "I think you know," he said. That flash moved through her eyes, the same rapid calculation he'd first seen the night Nia came home. Then she composed herself. "Malik, you're scaring me." "I've seen the safe, Keisha. All of it." The keys dropped from her hand. When she stood back up, the warmth was gone. What replaced it wasn't guilt, it was strategy, running fast beneath the surface. Then the tears arrived, quick, precise. One hand pressed to her sternum. "I did it for the children. I was protecting their future. I was terrified, Malik." "Keisha." "Amina just helped me organize." "Keisha." She stopped. "I've known," he said, "for a long time." Keisha's reaction follows the documented pattern known as DARVO, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. Rather than acknowledging harm, she pivoted immediately to justification, then apparent victimhood. Notice that in everything she said, the subject of every sentence was herself, her fear, her intentions, her feelings. There was no acknowledgement of his. For individuals with manipulative behavioral patterns, this response is nearly reflexive. It is designed to make the confronting partner feel guilty for causing pain, rather than justified in responding to betrayal. That was the moment the front door opened again. Nia and Josiah, unannounced. Nia to collect clothes, Josiah home for the weekend from Decatur. They walked in and found their parents 6 feet apart in the hallway, their mother crying, their father stone still. "What's going on?" Josiah said. Nia looked at her mother, then her father. She had always understood things before they were explained. "Mama," she said slowly, "what did you do?" "Your father is upset about decisions I made to protect." "She hid money," Malik said, evenly, without heat. "A significant amount, for years, while you were asking her for help." 4 seconds of silence. Then Nia sat down hard on the bottom stair. "You had the money," she said, "the entire time." "Nia, I was pregnant and scared, and you looked me in the face." Josiah stood in the center of the room, hands balled at his sides. "I told people you were the strongest person in this family," he said. His voice was very quiet. "I said that to real people." He pressed his lips together and stopped. Keisha reached toward him. He stepped back. "I'm done waiting," Malik said from the hallway. He turned and walked toward the stairs, Behind him, the living room held its silence. Child development researchers consistently find it is not conflict itself that most damages children. It is unresolved deception within the family system. When Nia and Josiah encountered the truth in that living room, they experienced what clinicians call identity rupture, the collapse of the parental image they had relied upon. For Josiah, who had publicly declared his mother the strongest person he knew, this rupture carried the additional weight of his own stated identity. Their grief was not simply about money. It was about the loss of the version of their family they had believed in. Malik still had not told them about Victor. He had not told them what was coming in 7 days. The confrontation in that living room was only the first crack. The real collapse was still ahead. When Keisha walks into that mediation room and realizes exactly what Victor Lang has been building for 6 months, she will make one final, desperate move. And it will be the cruelest thing she has ever done. Victor Lang had been Malik's friend since they were both 23, newly appointed deacons in training at First MEC, taking themselves very seriously about it. He was a quiet, methodical man, the kind of attorney who drove a 12-year-old Camry, wore the same 2 suits on rotation, and won cases that sent opposing counsel home to reconsider their choices. Malik had called him the week after the hospital, not in panic, not in anger. Walking the block on Paces Ferry Road on a gray Sunday afternoon, wrist still wrapped, ribs still aching, voice flat and steady. "I need your help," he had said. "I need to know what I'm actually dealing with before I do anything." Victor had not asked him to explain. He simply said, "Come see me Monday. Bring whatever you have." That conversation had taken place 6 months ago. In the weeks that followed, Malik had handed Victor everything. The camera footage, the bank records, the transfer timestamps, the overheard phone call, the USB drive. Victor had reviewed each piece without visible reaction, added it to a growing file, and continued asking calm, precise questions. He was not building a case for drama. He was building one for precision, the kind that does not leave room for a single coherent objection. The mediation hearing was held at a law office on West Peachtree Street, 10th floor, a conference room with windows that looked out over Atlanta on a clear November morning. Malik arrived 20 minutes early. He wore the dark suit he had bought for Josiah's 8th grade graduation, sat with his hands folded on the table, and looked out over the city with the expression of a man who has made his peace. Keisha arrived 5 minutes late. She came in with her own attorney, a composed, polished woman from a midtown firm, and walked to her seat with her chin level. She did not look at Malik for the first several minutes. Then Victor opened his briefcase. He laid it out without theater. 6 transfers over 14 months, $218,000 total, routed through an LLC registered under Amina's address in Sandy Springs. Investment accounts at a brokerage north of Buckhead, opened under a residential address that was not the Thompson family home. The $52,000 transfer from the night of Malik's hospitalization, time-stamped 45 minutes after Keisha had texted him about the soup on the stove. Keisha's attorney was writing quickly. Then Victor said evenly, "I would also like to introduce the medical documentation." The room shifted. "Over the last 3 years," Victor continued, "Mrs. Thompson represented to her husband, her children, and in preliminary legal discussions that she suffered from a serious cardiac condition, a condition she suggested might be worsened by the stress of divorce proceedings." He set a folder on the table. "Mrs. Thompson does not have a cardiac condition. She has never had one. The medical documents she presented to her family were altered by a third party." The kind of silence that followed is the kind that does not go away quickly. Fabricating or exaggerating illness within a marriage is one of the most insidious documented forms of emotional control. Clinicians call it somatic coercion, using the threat of physical vulnerability to manage a partner's behavior. In Keisha's case, the fabricated heart condition served a specific legal and psychological function. It made Malik afraid to pursue divorce, knowing it could be framed in court as abandoning a gravely ill wife. It made the children fiercely protective of their mother, and it maintained a layer of community sympathy that would have been extremely difficult to challenge. This tactic is particularly destructive because it does not exploit a partner's weakness. It exploits their love. It takes the most generous impulse a person has and turns it into a leash. Amina had been subpoenaed the week prior. She arrived with her own counsel and the measured composure of a woman who had spent the previous 48 hours deciding that full cooperation was her safest remaining option. She confirmed that she had helped Keisha locate a document forger through a contact in Decatur and had paid him $8,000 from the shared LLC to produce a cardiology file, convincing enough to deceive anyone who was not a medical professional. The plan was straightforward. If Malik ever moved decisively toward divorce, the fabricated condition would create sufficient emotional and legal complexity to delay proceedings and provide additional time to shift assets. Then Amina disclosed something else. She and Keisha had maintained a romantic relationship, intermittently, for 14 years. She said it without particular emotion, as though reading from a prepared statement. The stenographer's fingers kept moving. Sustaining a 14-year parallel relationship while presenting a flawless public marriage requires an extraordinary degree of what psychologists call compartmentalization, the ability to partition separate areas of one's life so completely that no emotional bleed-through occurs between them. For individuals with deep-rooted fear of financial or emotional abandonment, maintaining multiple safety nets simultaneously is not a conscious moral choice. It is a survival strategy developed early in life. The painful irony is that this very strategy, built entirely on the fear of being left, is precisely what guarantees it. The deception required to maintain the double life is the thing that ultimately destroys both. Josiah had not been scheduled to attend the hearing. He had driven up from Decatur before sunrise, because Nia had called the previous night. Her voice pulled thin. He sat in the hallway outside the conference room, unwilling to be further away, and when the door opened during recess, he was right there. He heard enough. He heard Amina say, 14 years. He heard the word, forged. He heard Victor Lang's careful voice explain how Keisha had used falsified records to keep Malik too afraid to act. When Keisha stepped into the hallway and saw her son standing there, she moved toward him immediately. "Josiah, let me explain, please." "Don't," he said. One word, flat and final, like a door swinging shut on its last hinge. "You faked being sick," he said, "so that Dad would be too afraid to leave." "I was protecting." "You used us to protect yourself." His voice broke on the last word, just slightly, and he pressed his jaw tight to hold the rest in. "I told people you were the strongest person I knew, Mama. I said that out loud to real people." Keisha's tears this time were real. That much was visible to anyone watching. But real tears do not reach damage that has already gone that deep. "You did not lose this family," Josiah said quietly. "You did not make mistakes. You planned it 3 years ago and kept planning while we were right there." He walked back to his chair and sat down without looking at her again. Inside the conference room, Malik sat with his hands folded on the table and his eyes on the middle distance. Those who knew him could read the stillness clearly. This was not suppression. This was not the careful, heavy silence he had carried for 18 months while gathering evidence and maintaining a neutral face at breakfast. This was something different, the stillness of a man who has set down something very heavy and does not intend to pick it up again. When the hearing concluded and the hallway had mostly emptied, Keisha came to stand near him. The performance was gone from her face entirely. She looked like what she was, a 40-year-old woman standing at the edge of the consequences she had built. "Malik," she said, just above a whisper, "I'm sorry. I don't know what else there is to say." He looked at her for a long moment. "You never saw me as your partner," he said. "You saw me as your safety ticket. I stayed in that role for 18 years because I loved you. But I'm done now." He turned and walked back into the conference room. What Malik said in that hallway, "You saw me as your safety ticket," represents what therapists call clear-eyed closure. Not bitterness, not a desire for revenge, but a precise, accurate naming of what the relationship actually was. Recovery research consistently shows that healing from betrayal trauma does not begin with forgiveness. It begins with clarity, the ability to see the relationship as it truly was, rather than as one hoped it would be. That clarity is what Malik had spent 6 months earning through evidence, through late nights, through sitting in his own pain without flinching. It was the most important thing he had built. And unlike the marriage, it would last. But Keisha was not finished. She had one move left, and she intended to play it at his front door, with their children standing behind her, aimed directly at the one part of him she knew she could still reach. What Keisha does when she arrives at Malik's door with the children in tow will force him to make the hardest choice of his life. And what he discovers next will show you just how far a cornered person will go. She came to his door on a Saturday morning, 3 days after the mediation hearing. Malik had moved into a rented room in Virginia Highland, on a quiet street off North Highland Avenue, where neighbors left each other in peace the easy Atlanta way. He'd taken his tools, his clothes, and the framed photo from Josiah's 8th grade graduation. Nothing else. He was on the porch with his coffee when Keisha's car pulled up. She stepped out slowly. Then the back doors opened, Nia and Josiah behind her. Nia moved carefully, 7 months along now. Josiah came up the steps looking at the boards, working through something privately. Keisha had positioned herself just behind the children. Malik noticed it the moment she stepped out. He had always been good at noticing things. He had just spent years choosing not to say so. "Malik, please, can we talk?" He looked at his children, then at her. "Come on up," he said. Clinicians call this triangulation through children, the strategic use of a child's presence as pressure on the other parent. It cannot be named in the moment without the naming parent appearing heartless. The children themselves are not complicit. They are being used without knowing it. This is why family therapists consistently advise one foundational rule during separation. Decisions about the marriage must be made independent of the children's physical presence. The moment children become instruments in an adult conflict, they are being harmed, even when they are simply standing in a doorway in their ordinary clothes. They sat in the small living room, Keisha by the window, Malik on the couch, the children between them. She had dressed simply, plain blue dress, no jewelry, hair natural, a calculated softness. Malik recognized it and said nothing. She talked about growing up in Southwest Atlanta, watching her mother ask her father for grocery money, watching scarcity make people hard. She talked about fear, real fear, she said, that love alone wasn't a stable enough foundation, that one bad year could undo everything. "I know what I did was wrong. I know that doesn't cover it. But I wasn't building something against you. I was building something because I was afraid." Malik listened without interrupting. Then her voice dropped. "Withdraw the petition. For the children. Give us time. I'll go to counseling. I'll do whatever you need. But please don't do this to our family." Josiah was watching his father. Nia was looking at the floor. And Malik felt it. That pull. The love that doesn't disappear simply because you've decided to stop letting it be used against you. 20 years. That was not nothing. It would never be nothing. But before he could speak, his phone rang. It was Victor. Victor's voice was measured as always. Keisha had hired a private investigator 18 months earlier. 40 pages of surveillance. Malik's daily routes, work contacts, personal habits. The investigator had photographed him speaking with a female coworker outside a diner on Peachtree Street and built a file suggesting romantic impropriety, with no factual basis. The file was prepared for use in a custody proceeding to portray Malik as emotionally unavailable. Victor paused. There is one additional matter. We have recovered text messages between Mrs. Thompson and Amina, dated 8 days ago, discussing what they called an alternative outcome if you decline to withdraw the petition. The language is indirect, but both the investigator we consulted and I interpret it as a discussion about arranging circumstances that could physically endanger you. The room went completely still. Josiah's face lost its color. Nia pressed both hands over her mouth. That was not serious, Keisha said immediately. We were upset. We were venting. Keisha? Malik's voice was very quiet. Stop. She stopped. Risk specialists call this ideation communication, the verbalization of harmful intent, even within a private exchange. Research on intimate partner conflict consistently identifies the period immediately after separation as the most elevated in risk for the targeted partner. When a controlling person faces simultaneous loss of financial security, social standing, and personal narrative, behavioral limits that held during the relationship can become unreliable. Malik's decision throughout this process, never negotiating alone, never responding to emotional pressure without counsel present, was not emotional distance. It was wisdom. The weight of everything broke through Nia that afternoon. The hearing, the drive over, the truth sitting in that living room. The cramping started quietly and wouldn't stop. Malik drove her to Piedmont Atlanta Hospital himself, one hand on the wheel, one hand holding hers. Some things can only be moved through. She lost the pregnancy that afternoon. Josiah was in the waiting room when Keisha arrived. He stood when he saw her. I still love you. You're my mother. I will always love you, but I cannot be around you right now, maybe not for a long time. He walked to his father's side and sat down. Keisha stood alone in the doorway as the late afternoon light came pale through the window. At the final court hearing 2 weeks later, Victor presented the complete file. Every transfer, every forged document, the surveillance dossier, the recovered messages, the fabricated cardiac records. The judge ruled in Malik's favor on every material point. He kept the house. He recovered the majority of the assets. Keisha received a structured financial settlement and 18 months of probation for financial fraud. Her attorney shook Malik's hand briefly on the way out. Keisha sat alone in her chair after the courtroom had emptied, for a long time. Research consistently challenges the myth that maintaining an intact household is inherently better for children than an honest separation. Children raised in homes with active deception and emotional manipulation don't experience stability. They experience a performance of stability. What they learn from it is that love requires hiding, and that the good parent is the one who endures without speaking. When Malik finally acted, quietly, with full dignity, he didn't break his family. He showed his children what it looks like to refuse to be made small. That lesson is more protective than any household built on lies. Justice had arrived, quietly, methodically, without a single raised voice from the man who always deserved better. But the part of this story that will stay with you is still ahead. What Malik builds in the 6 months that follow begins with a single question he asks his son on a Sunday morning walk. And the answer will remind you exactly what kind of man he has always been. Atlanta in early April is a different city than the one Malik had moved through that October night. The dogwoods along Ponce de Leon Avenue were blooming white and pale pink, and the neighborhood of Virginia Highland had that particular April feeling. The whole block seemed to exhale after a long winter, warm without being heavy, bright without being sharp. like something had quietly decided to begin again. Malik's apartment was a second-floor unit on a craftsman block off North Highland Avenue. The walls were mostly bare. He had left them that way on purpose. He liked the open space. He liked having room to breathe without filling it immediately with something. There would be time for that. He had planted a small container garden on the back deck. Tomatoes, parsley. A stubborn rosemary bush that refused to fully cooperate but was, at least, still standing. On Saturday mornings, when the early light came in low and gold across the boards, Malik sat with his coffee and simply listened to the neighborhood come awake. A wind chime somewhere down the street, a car on North Highland. The quiet that settles over a weekend morning when nobody is asking anything of you. He had not known this kind of quiet in years. He had earned every second of it. What Malik was experiencing in these early months is what trauma recovery specialists call post-traumatic growth. The documented phenomenon in which individuals who have survived serious relational betrayal do not simply return to their previous baseline, but develop a stronger, clearer, more grounded sense of self than they had before the trauma. Research shows that the primary drivers of this growth are not time alone, but intentionality and agency. The degree to which a person makes active, deliberate choices about their own healing, rather than passively waiting for pain to pass. Every small decision Malik made, the bare walls kept empty by choice, the garden planted by his own hand, the Saturday morning quiet protected without apology, was an act of reclaiming ownership of his own life. That reclamation, done in small, deliberate pieces, is the actual architecture of healing. Nia came on weekends. She was healing in the slow, uneven way that real healing works, and she moved through her grief with the same stubbornness she had always brought to everything. Some mornings she was fragile, and some mornings she was fierce. And most mornings she was both at once, which was honest, which was the only way worth healing. She always went straight to the refrigerator when she arrived. "Daddy, there is nothing in here but leftovers and 2 eggs. Those are very good eggs. I'm going to Ponce City Market. You really don't need to. I want to. Let me." So he let her. And when she came back and moved around his kitchen with the easy confidence of a young woman who had watched her father cook for 17 years, something settled between them that did not need to be named. The kind of peace that arrives without announcement and simply stays. She would rest her head on his shoulder while something quiet played on the television, and he would let her, because that was how both of them healed, in small, unannounced pieces. Never all at once. Josiah came the last weekend of every month, driving up from Decatur with a duffel bag and a sack of fast food, and the particular energy of a 15-year-old who had grown up faster than he should have had to and was still figuring out how to carry it. He was seeing a therapist, a man Malik had found who worked with adolescents from an office on Morningside Drive, and he was doing the real work of it, in the uneven way that genuine work gets done. One Sunday, they walked the path near the lake in Piedmont Park, the morning easy and warm, and Josiah said without looking up, "Do you think she knew what she was doing to us? Like, really knew?" Malik considered it honestly before he answered. "I think she knew," he said. "I think she built a story about why it was justified, and told that story so many times she started to believe it herself. But knowing something is wrong and deciding it's acceptable, those are not the same thing." Josiah nodded slowly. "Is that why you didn't explode? Why you just stayed quiet and prepared?" "Because exploding would have frightened you," Malik said simply. "And you had both been frightened enough. It wasn't my job to add to that. It was my job to fix it." A few steps of quiet. Then Josiah said, "You're a real man, Dad." It landed in Malik's chest, in the place where the grief and the long years of careful silence had been living. The place that had been held under pressure for so long it had almost forgotten what it felt like to be still. He did not cry, but he put his hand briefly on the back of his son's neck, the way fathers do. "So are you," he said. "You're going to be." Malik Thompson's story is not at its core about betrayal. It is about the slow, corrosive cost of silence and the extraordinary power of finally ending it. Research on family systems is unambiguous. Enduring harm quietly for the sake of the children or the household does not protect those children. It teaches them that harm is acceptable, that love requires self-erasure, and that the good person is the one who absorbs the most without speaking. When Malik finally acted, not in anger, not in spectacle, but with patience and dignity and a signed envelope placed quietly in the back of a safe, he did not simply save himself. He showed his children, in the most lasting way possible, what it looks like to draw a line, to say, "This far and no further." That lesson, clinical experts consistently find, is more protective for children than any intact household built on deception ever could be. One evening in late April, Malik sat on his back deck with the tomatoes and the stubborn rosemary and the wind chime going faintly down the block. And he thought about a man who had planted a persimmon tree 15 years ago and told his laughing wife, "Everything I build to last." He had meant it as a promise to her. He understood now that it had always been a promise to himself. He was still here. He had lost things, real things, lasting things, things that would leave their marks. But he was still here, still choosing, still building. And that, he thought, was its own kind of victory, the quiet kind, the kind that holds. This story teaches us something that no greeting card will ever say out loud. If someone in your life has been slowly making you feel invisible, not with one loud cruelty, but with 100 quiet ones, you do not owe them your continued silence. You do not owe them one more Sunday morning of pretending. Tonight, pull out a piece of paper, not your phone, actual paper, and write down the one thing you stopped doing for yourself the year you started disappearing into someone else's needs. Maybe it was the watercolor class at the community center on Elm Street. Maybe it was calling your sister on Tuesday evenings. Maybe it was simply sitting on your own porch without explaining yourself to anyone. Write it down. Then do it this week. Once. That is enough to start. Dignity does not announce itself. It shows up quietly. The way a man plants a tree on a Saturday afternoon, presses the soil flat, and says to no one in particular, "Everything I build to last." Drop silent or confront in the comments and tell us what you would have done. Your story matters, and so does his. Thank you for watching. If this reached you today, please share it with someone who needs it.